This is a talk that's a part of the clinical trials network for the Paraglide HF study. And, as a lot of people know by now, that this really is meant to pair equitable trial enrollment with fit development. And one of the most special aspects of this program is how the fellows develop these incredible relationships with their PI mentors. So Jeremy Brooksbank is one of our fit trialists. He is here at Cleveland Clinic and is going to be leading this discussion as somebody who's had direct mentorship from Dr. Starling, just as Trey has had in the past and still does have. So Jeremy is a third-year general cardiology fellow at Cleveland Clinic. He was born in Cookeville, Tennessee, and he stayed in the state at the University of Tennessee for his undergraduate and medical schools. He went on to Duke University for internal medicine residency training and then moved to Cleveland Clinic for general fellowship. He plans to pursue a career in advanced heart failure and transplantation with a special interest in mechanical circulatory support and shock. Jeremy enjoys all types of music, football, and golf. And if you guys may have heard his voice before on an episode, but he is an extraordinarily accomplished and professionally trained opera singer. So if Jeremy moderates some of these things, maybe he can provide some questions and sing song, and to keep it interesting.
Ooh,
Also,
I'm on the spot.
just personally, I will say that Jeremy, he spends a lot of time in the hospital because he loves it, and most of the clinical interactions I've had with him are on my STEMI call. And in his role as a senior fellow at night, oftentimes he is a first respondent when a STEMI patient hits the door and gets into our cath lab. So he's there. He's my right hand and I'm his right hand before the interventional attendant comes in to get access, get the diagnostic CAT, try to figure out what's going on, stabilize the patient. And I just, it's been amazing to work with Jeremy, and he has complete implicit trust. And there's no one I'd rather have by my side. So Jeremy, with that, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you so much, Amit. I really appreciate you having me this evening, and really privileged to be able to introduce my mentor, Dr. Starling. So, Dr. Randall Starling is professor of medicine at Cleveland Clinic, who's had a storied career in advanced heart failure and cardiac transplantation. He's the former president of the Heart Failure Society of America and current section head of the Advanced Heart Failure Division at Cleveland Clinic. He has held innumerable academic and leadership titles over the years, but these pale in comparison to the impact he has had on his patients and trainees. I've had the good fortune to work with Dr. Starling in clinic over the past year, and I can speak personally as to how amazing he is with patients and their loved ones. He also has an uncanny ability to recall nearly every detail about any of his patients and clinical trial data, for that matter, at the drop of a hat. He's consistently one of the fellows' favorite attendings to work with here at the clinic, and can often be found presenting patients to the fellow rather than the other way around. Dr. Starling has set an incredible example for many trainees over the years, and I'm privileged to get to know him and watch a true master physician at work. We're lucky to have him join us tonight to discuss career development, trials, and mentorship. Thanks so much, Dr. Starling.
Right. Okay. So this is not really a didactic presentation, and the content is nothing you need to take notes on, but hopefully it may serve to some degree to inspire you, to bolster your confidence, just to share a bit of my journey and to give you some important pearls that I think are keys to success. So I think of myself as a blue collar cardiologist, and that's because I was born and raised in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, which was the steel capital of the world at that time. And although I wanted to go to Georgetown, I wound up going to state universities for most of my education. So, Amit, if you can let me share the screen, I'm going to put up some slides to kick this discussion off, okay?
Yes, Dr. Starling, you should be able to share.
Just if you would mentor me as to what button I have to click, please?
So there should be a button on the bottom right that says share screen. I think it appears as green.
Yeah, I got it.
Okay.
Ooh,
Perfect. And we see your slides.
you can?
Yes.
Okay, great. So, cardio nerds and just a little bit of background history. So, you were given some background on the paraglide trial and the network, but what this is really about was the idea to give fellows an opportunity to be embedded in a clinical trial and to see what they could learn from that. And along the way, it was evident to us that the expertise of the steering committee could also serve to provide one-on-one uh, dialogues with the cardio nerds that were the fit trialists. So that was kind of where this started. And so I want to talk a bit about mentoring, which all of you know, I think, what that definition is. So, an experienced and trusted advisor, uh, a motivator, a coach, a support, a goal, helps one set goals. But uh, these are the standard definitions. And this is, I think, it's not the first paper, but it's maybe the third or fourth paper that I published. You can see the publication date is 1988 on this. And the impetus behind this was I was a fellow. I was involved with a very sick patient with myocarditis and who was thinking about bridge to transplant or biventricular support back, uh, 30 plus years ago. But I was working with some innovative people. You probably don't recognize a lot of the names on this slide as far as the co-authors, but this guy, Donald Unverfurth, was my mentor. And Dr. Unverfurth was a varsity quarterback for the Ohio State University Buckeyes who played under Woody Hayes, who took me in a room one day and introduced me to a patient that was Woody Hayes. But Dr. Unverfurth, who was a successful quarterback, I don't think the word no was in his vocabulary. Everything was a smile, a pat on the back, and you can get it done. Uh, Being a frivolous, innocent individual, I submitted this case report to the New England Journal, which of course they declined. So it wound up in the hands of who still is an editor today, William Roberts in Texas in the American Journal of Cardiology. Took 2 or 3 shots, but it got published. So just as a way of background, I was a chief medical resident at the University of Pittsburgh. I was a cardiology fellow at Ohio State. My first job was at Ohio State. And this is a teaching point here. So after 3 years, I got recruited back by my chief of medicine as to when I was the chief resident. That was Gerald Levy at the University of Pittsburgh, who recruited me to be the medical director of the heart transplant program at the University of Pittsburgh, which at the time was the largest in the country. I got a few vibes along the way as I was interviewing that something may be going on. And on I think my third visit, I asked the chief of medicine point blank, I noticed your house is for sale. Um, are you going somewhere? And he said, no, 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 we're empty nesters. Don't worry about it. So I moved to Pittsburgh in June. And in August, he announced that he was leaving to work for Merck. And many of the promises that had been made to me and the resources never happened. So I spent a short amount of time there and actually, fortunately, was welcomed back by another mentor, Carl Lear, at Ohio State, where I stayed for 3 years. So I was fortunate enough to become a tenured associate professor um, on the basis of an NIH grant and some other good fortune. But I just was frustrated that Ohio State was not a place that I could grow. So I went to my chief of cardiology and I said, Dr. Lear, I don't think I'm ever going to be able to make it as a transplant cardiologist at Ohio State. What do you think if I change to become a preventive cardiologist? Now, bear in mind, Dr. Lear was a heart failure specialist who introduced dobutamine to the world. So he was a renowned person at the time. And he said, look, you're going to stay in heart failure. I will not support you to switch to preventive cardiology. So within the next year, I got a phone call from somebody by the name of Eric Topol, who recruited me to the Cleveland Clinic. And that's the evolution of how I wound up there in 1995. So just to summarize, I was an assistant professor in 88, associate professor with tenure in 94, moved to a Cleveland Clinic, and became a full professor in 1998. And becoming section head was another interesting story that I think is a good example. So when I went to the Cleveland Clinic, my intention was to work with a team. I didn't necessarily want to be the leader of the team. And I was pretty happy in my role, but the section head at the time, Jim Young, another iconic heart failure person, was appointed chairman of medicine. So Eric Topol walked in my office shortly thereafter, and he said, Randy, I want you to be the section head of heart failure. I said, Dr. Topol, aren't you going to do a search? He said, I already performed a national search and I've selected you to be the section head. I said, can I have some time to think about this? And maybe what I should do is prepare you a proposal as if I was an external candidate, and then we can talk over this. So he left, and 2 or 3 minutes later, I went to the office next door, which is where another mentor of mine was that I'll introduce you to shortly. But I said to this iconic mentor who was also a heart failure specialist, his name being Gary Francis, I said, Gary, this is what happened. This is what Topol said. I don't want to take this position. What do you recommend? And Dr. Francis said to me, you have two choices: accept the position or get a suitcase and pack your bags, because you won't be able to stay here if you turn Dr. Topol down. So that was the advice I got from my mentor. So as fate would have it, Dr. Topol moved on. Stephen Nissen became the chairman, and I was one of the vice chairs of the cardiology department as of 2006. So as far as external activities and everything that's listed here, I think there's a whole story behind how it helps one in one's career growth and leadership. So an ex-ACC president was a cardiologist when I was at Ohio State by the name of Richard Lewis. He walked into my office one day. This was around 1994, and he said, "Do you think the ACC should establish a heart failure transplant committee?" I said, "Yeah, that sounds like a good idea, Dr. Lewis." And he then said, "Okay, we'll do it, and we'll see if we can have you appointed as a junior faculty." So the committee came to be, and the head of that committee was none other than Sharon Hunt, one of the grand uh, leaders of establishing cardiac transplantation. So me going on that committee as a junior person gave me instantly the opportunity to sit around the table and meet a lot of very influential people. Uh, Down the road, Stephen Nissen became chair or president of the American College of Cardiology. He asked me and two of my colleagues to be the program chair for the ACC meeting. You can imagine, if you've been to that meeting, that's quite an undertaking, and that was also quite a learning experience. I then was asked by Mandeep Mehra, the president of the ISHLT at the time, to be the program chair for the 2009 ISHLT meeting. This was a unique experience because ISHLT is an international organization, so never turn down an opportunity from an international organization as it expands your bandwidth, it expands your network of contacts from the US to abroad, primarily Europe and to some degree Asia. I served on the ISHLT board and then became quite involved with HFSA. Again, that was through a mentor, Gary Francis, who I think was the one who nominated me to become part of the HFSA board. So through the Heart Failure Society of America, there's a pathway for progression through various officers to become president. And then finally, I mentioned the United Network of Organ Sharing. Those of you that are familiar with heart transplantation know that UNOS is a government appointed, reports to the Director of Health and Human Services, and regulates transplantation in the US. So being appointed as a member of the Membership Professional and Standards Committee is a big time commitment, but it gives you an inside look of transplant programs around the country, who runs them, their successes, their failures, another great learning experience. And finally, on the UNOS board, which most board appointments do tend to be their service obligations, but you get a lot in return as far as what you learn. So when I think of the traits that I I believe are necessary for a successful career in medicine or anything, this could be Tiger Woods or Tom Brady, but it's perseverance, it's resiliency, it's constant evolution. And it's the recognition that most of the time you have to create an opportunity. It's not really handed to you. And as another mentor who's now retired, Bruce Lido, a storied cardiac surgeon at the Cleveland Clinic, used to say, is everything else in life can go to the wayside, but your integrity is something that is long-standing, which you can violate in one day and never get it back. So there's many temptations along the way to deviate from your standards, but that has many risks involved. So I want to point out some individuals here. Most of them I've already mentioned, but the point here is this is a progression. And what you need to take in mind about mentorship is it's not just for medical students, it's not just for residents, it's not just for fellows, it's for everyone, no matter what the stage is of your career. Everyone needs a shoulder someone else to go to as a sounding board. So I had the good fortune as a medical student at Temple University in Philadelphia, when I was a student, to meet an intern by the name of Doug Mann, who the name is probably familiar to many of you, but he went on to be president of HFSA, chief of cardiology at Washington University, St. Louis, and is the current editor-in-chief of Jack Translational. But I met Doug when I was a medical student, and he still is a mentor to me. Dr. Levy was my chairman of medicine. I was one of his chief residents. He went on to lead the UCLA Medical Center and to build it as to what it is today. Unfortunately, he is now deceased. Dr. Lear, as I mentioned, was my chief of cardiology. He inspired many of us. He was Don Unverfurth's best friend. Dr. Unverfurth, I mentioned early on, but I didn't tell you the rest of the story. As a cardiology fellow, one day there was a lot of buzz going on in the fellows' room, and the buzz was that Dr. Unverfurth was driving to work, and his car was pulled over along the highway in Columbus. And actually, a cardiology fellow saw his car pulled over and noticed that he was post-ictal and he had had a seizure. Dr. Unverfurth was then unfortunately diagnosed with a glioblastoma. He died a couple years later, but as a fellow, I was asked by Dr. Lear to kind of stay at his side. I was his clinic fellow, and it was a very sad experience to watch his health decline. But that was another situation that I got thrust into. Dr. Topol, as I mentioned, recruited me, and I would put Dr. Topol near the top of the list of one of the most inspirational individuals I've ever met. That I tell people over the course of a conversation that, you know, if I had to, walk across a bed of nails to do something for Dr. Topol, I would probably do it. Dr. Francis, as I mentioned, was also recruited from Minnesota by Dr. Topol and led our coronary care unit for an extended period. But he served as a mentor to me. And then finally, I would have never dreamed if you had said to me 10 or 15 years ago that I would know Eugene Brunwald. I remember as a resident being told that he and his wife, who was a cardiac surgeon, were this dynamic academic powerhouse. And the word was that, Dr. Brunwald had published 100 papers before he even finished medical school. I think he went to NYU. It's chronicled in the Brunwald Chronicles. Dr. Goyle would know. But I walked into a heart failure network meeting one day, another example of clinical trials and research. And there was Dr. Brunwald sitting in the front of the room, which I was somewhat petrified, but soon learned he was a gentle giant. He was very accommodating. And over the course of a number of years, we developed a friendship, which led to his personal invitation for me to write a number of book chapters and be involved in a variety of projects, which again is just another example of mentoring and how that can lead to leadership. So this isn't I'm not taking a test here, but there's two people on this slide that are quite famous individuals. So the person with the goatee is Jay Cohn, Cohn. So If you know the VHF studies, if you know the ValHF study, this is the guy that did all the seminal work, not only with dopamine and nitroprusside, but then with isodo and hydralazine and subsequently valsartan. I got to know Dr. Cohn again through other mentors and networking and in some clinical trials. Dr. Francis, who's sitting there, was actually a mentee of Dr. Cohn. So this is, if you guys and ladies all know who Bill Belichick is, and sometimes you hear in sports people talk about the Belichick tree. So you can do the same thing when you think about mentors and mentees in academic medicine. So Dr. Cohn has many, many people in his tree. Speaking of giants, uh, I look like a midget there. I'm only 5'7" or 8, but uh, this is another giant, Shaquille O'Neal, and he was, well, I guess you could say he was a mentor to me because he really inspired me when I learned that he was personally donating money from his foundation to purchase Bidil, Isodil, and hydralazine to serve indigent populations in urban areas that were underserved and just didn't have the money for medication to treat their heart failure. And that was Shaquille O'Neal. And he became a spokesperson for social determinants of health, disparities, diversity. And we had the good fortune to have him as a guest and a speaker in 2019 in Philadelphia at the Heart Failure Society of America. So, how can clinical trials help one's career advance? Um, I think you've already heard most of what I'm going to say here. So, through networking, you instantly have exposure to known leaders. You have the ability to develop new expertise. You have the opportunity to be part of publications, and it just serves as a stepping stone for more. So if you get asked to be a site PI, that means you're going to be part of investigator meetings. You're going to interact with people. If your site does well, people are going to know who you are. And if your site does well, you're going to get asked to be in more clinical trials. So it's just a snowball effect. And I think in my case, most of the success that I had along the way was totally through clinical trials, which were industry sponsored, but I also did a lot of work in NIH sponsored U grants and had the good fortune to lead a number of trials in cardiac transplantation. So again, you're going to meet 20 or 30 people minimum that are peers, in some cases, iconic, established individuals that if you make a good impression, it's just going to lead to more and more opportunity. So this is an example of something that happened to me. My name is buried at the end of the paper as a site investigator, but when my mentor, Dr. Underfirth, became incapacitated with his glioblastoma, it was my first year on faculty, and I was asked to assume the site PI of this NIH-sponsored myocarditis treatment trial. And this is where networking began. Jay Cohn, who was the chief of cardiology at the University of Utah, John, aka Jack O'Connell, another iconic individual, Margaret Billingham, the mother of cardiac transplant, endomyocardial biopsies, just a tremendous opportunity to meet so many people. I also want to elaborate a little bit on international exposure. So one of the things that I did when I was at HFSA was tried to make it a more international organization and to forge collaborations with some of our European and Asian colleagues. I had a lot of support from HFSA leadership. HFSA now has an international relations committee, and this is just an example of myself with the president of the Japanese Heart Failure Society and this gentleman, Petar Seferovic, who was the sitting president of the ESC at the time, and how HFSA went from no international relations to expanded relations. And I can't underestimate, or I should say, I can't underemphasize the importance of once you get your career moving to expand beyond the US, what you will learn from colleagues outside the US, both in the purely medical, but in non-medical, as far as the politics of medicine and academic medicine, how to interact with people, how to negotiate, fundamental and just tremendous opportunities. So finally, I'm going to mention a couple projects that I was involved with that have specific stories. So we became concerned around 2013 that something was going on with thrombosis of LVADs. So we were able to perform an analysis at the Cleveland Clinic that we were very impressed with as far as the veracity of the data. We sent it in to the FDA, we notified the vendor, and we submitted it for publication. Again, I took the bold move and sent it to the New England Journal, which they reviewed it and sent me a nice letter and said, sorry, this is a single center study and we're not going to publish it. But if you had more centers or registry information, we might consider it. So through my friend at Duke, Chris O'Connor, we had a discussion. He said, Duke's going to come in on this project. We then got in touch with our friends at Washington University, Doug Mann. They joined us on the project. So this was May. So we got data use agreements. We worked hard. We persisted. So we got about 1,000 patients from 3 different centers. We reconfigured the manuscript. We resubmitted it. And a week later, we got an acceptance from the New England Journal. From the day they accepted this was posted online 21 days later. So again, if you look, there's a lot of pretty famous people here that we got to interact with, including Joe Rogers, Dr. Mazami, who's now at NYU, Dr. Silvestri, who runs the big program in Florida, Dr. Ewald at Washington University, Dr. Ramey now at Jefferson, Dr. Acker, chief of cardiac surgery at Penn, etc. So what was the greeting I got from this? Well, I got 3 letters to the editors from 3 famous, iconic people that basically said, we think your data is bad and we don't think it's true. But history tells the rest of the story. This is another article that I like to show people that are early in their career, just from an inspirational standpoint. So we did this clinical trial with this drug called declizumab, which got a black box, uh, which is like the drug that's available today, uh, Simulac or basiliximab, which is used for renal sparing and induction. Bottom line is, we worked with, again, some real leaders in the field, Dr. Eisen, Dr. Kormos, who's now the vice president at Abbott, um, many others, but we sent this to the New England Journal, rejected. We revised it, resubmitted de novo, rejected. Uh, so we persisted. We submitted a third time, accepted, and published with an editorial. So again, the message being, you got to stand behind your work if you believe it's good work, and don't take no for an answer. So I'm going to stop at that point, Amit, and certainly there's time for any questions that I can try to answer.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Starling, for all of those thoughts. And my goodness, so much valuable information to unpack there. But I got to admit, I never get tired of seeing that picture of you with Shaquille O'Neal. It's just, it's priceless. Um, so I, I had a couple of questions, or one question that I'll ask, and then we'll sort of open it up to the group and anyone who wants to ask any questions. So Dr. Starling, many mentorships sort of occur naturally with where you are, who you're working with, who you round with in the hospital, et cetera. But when you're early in your training and then into early career, when you're moving different institutions and things like that, what did you look for? What were the characteristics in a mentor that you tried to identify to really hone in on, okay, this is a person that I should really um, focus on and nurture this relationship and try to learn as much as I can from this person? You had an excellent slide about, general characteristics of who we all sort of aspire to be as people and physicians. But from you as someone earlier in the career going through and identifying those mentors, what did you look for? How did you know, okay, this is a good person to talk to moving forward? And
And
were there any characteristics that really stuck out in your mind?
yeah, Jeremy, you're raising a good point, and I think it's bi-directional. So what I mean by that is, what is the mentee looking for, and what is the mentor looking for? So I think when you're looking for a mentor, bear in mind, uh, the individual could be quiet and reclusive, or the individual could be exuberant and outgoing. So I think just by observation, uh, individuals will get a sense of who has personality that they might gravitate to. So whether that's somebody that you're exposed to on rounds, giving a lecture, that you go up and ask a question afterwards and you get an idea of how receptive that individual is. Uh, I get cold calls all the time, which are emails, uh, primarily emails, and, you know, or it's an internal referral. So it could be your fellowship director. It could be Dr. Menon calls somebody and said, can you meet with this person? The fellowship directors tend to know who has an open door and who doesn't have the time. But being a mentor, of course, requires a time commitment. And it's not something you do because you're paid to do it. You do it because you uh, you get satisfaction from feeling that you are transferring something to another individual. Now, on the flip side of it, what does the uh, mentor expect from the mentee? And I think the answer to that is it's a commitment. And, you don't make a contract, but you have a discussion, and maybe you're given some ideas, and maybe you're given a to-do list of deliverables, and you got to come through. And you'll probably get two or three tries, but if the mentee is committed, I think the mentor is going to give back uh, double or triple, because there's nothing more satisfying to the mentor than to see the mentee succeeding.
Yeah, that was fabulous. I think a lot of us ask, what are the responsibilities of the mentor? What do we look for in a good mentor, et cetera? And these are really important questions, but I think the reverse is so true as well. Um, Dr. Starling, everyone here, just by virtue of being a part of this group, are very active, self-motivated, already very accomplished, and because of all of those things, will have a lot of opportunities available to them. And on one hand, you want to say yes to everything you can, so that you are available and people think of you and you put yourself out there. You don't know what activities or you know things might get you in the right place at the right time with the right person, and you benefit from it. But then at the same time, you have to know when to say no. Everything comes with an opportunity cost, and you are somebody who have you've had so many opportunities available to you, from the chairman position that you were a little ambivalent about in the beginning, to being engaged in societies, to being a site PI and lead PI for trials. How do you know when to say no? And do you have any examples of things maybe you signed up for that you felt like maybe moved you away from your goals?
So again, you're raising an excellent point, and I'm going to try to answer it as best I can. So I think early on, you don't know when to say no. And uh, everyone has a tendency to overcommit. And everyone also knows the adage, which is uh, undercommit and overproduce. That's hard to do. And I think that's where a mentor comes in. Uh, Go to your mentor, ask them, should I do this? Is this high value? Dr. Martin has come to me on at least one, if not two or three occasions regarding some opportunities he had to ask me, what do you think? So that's that's number one. Um, I'll give you an example of something I said no to that still bothers me to this day. So the president of the Heart Failure Society of America was Tom Force at the time, to be president. And Dr. Force was a very accomplished scientist who, out of the blue, asked me to be program chair for the HFSA meeting during his year as president. And I turned him down. And at the time, I was overcommitted. I was vice chairman, I was section head, I was acting chief of cardiology at Cleveland Clinic, Florida. I was on the board of governors at Cleveland Clinic. And I just said to Dr. Force, I said, I want to do this, but I don't think I can do it justice because of all my commitments. He didn't stop. He kept asking me two or three times. And ultimately, I stood my ground and said no. So I would have loved to have been the program chair. I would have loved to have done that for Dr. Force, but I had to make a decision. And uh, this isn't relevant to this group, but um, it is relevant. So when along the way, when I've been asked to look at various chief of cardiology positions, I would just go to the chairman's office, which was Dr. Nissen a lot of the time, and say, such and such an institution is recruiting me for chief of cardiology. And those of you that know Dr. Nissen know he doesn't mince words. He would just say, that's a low level program, forget it. Or, he would give you his advice. So you got to use your mentor to help you with time management because it's extremely important. Time is precious. I get tired of people saying to me, oh, I know how busy you are. And I stop them and say, we all have 24 hours, 1,440, however minutes. It's the same for all of us. So you have to manage the time. No one is busier than anyone else. We all have the same amount of time. You have to decide how to spend it.
Thank you for that, Dr. Starling. Does anyone have any questions or thoughts you'd like to share? I'll ask another one, Dr. Starling. You've been engaged in industry-sponsored trials, investigator-initiated trials, NIH-sponsored trials. What, in your perspective, have there been any tangible differences, or would you seek one out versus another in how you select how to spend your time and how to collaborate with others?
So I'm going to give you an example. And the trial I'm going to use as an example was called Ascend HF. So some of you on this call may have heard of a drug by the name of Nizaretide. So Nizaretide was a synthetic engineered peptide that was touted as the be-all end-all to treat acute decompensated heart failure. Based on what would be considered inadequate data today, it got approved. When it got approved, this trial proliferated like wildfire. Physicians were getting paid exorbitant money to give lectures. And Dr. Topol at the time and Dr. Nissen had it in their crosshairs as something was not right. Long story short, our friend Dr. Brunwald was commissioned by industry to examine all the data, and Dr. Brunwald came back and said, we need a proper clinical trial. The data that this drug's approval was based on is underpowered. We need a clinical trial. So I decided that I wanted to be the PI and that we would submit a proposal, which we did. We didn't know it, but at the same time, we were competing with DCRI and Duke University and Chris O'Connor. So the proposals get submitted. Next thing we know, it's announced Salim Youssef from McMaster University gets the award. This is over $100 million to run the clinical trial. Within 30 days, it's announced that Dr. Youssef has been relieved of his responsibilities. The sponsor is withdrawing the award, and we're back to square one. So at the time, the current FDA commissioner, Rob Califf, was at Duke. So we decided, let's join forces. Maybe 1 + 1 = 10. So we submitted a joint proposal from Cleveland Clinic, Cardiovascular Coordinating Center, and DCRI. And I learned a tremendous amount from Dr. Califf because he made it very clear this was going to be an academic trial. Yes, it was industry sponsored, but he drew boundaries, he drew firewalls. I learned so much from Dr. Califf. So the bottom line, Amit, is I think you can do just fine in an industry-sponsored trial as long as you're dealing with an ethical company with ethical people that have the same academic morals, and values. Certainly, Novartis fits into that category. Um, so, but industry has gotten a black eye along the way because of, I think, sometimes overzealous marketing, claims that can't be substantiated. But I think in many ways, I prefer industry sponsored because it tends to be more efficient. Don't quote me on this, but there's a lot of bureaucracy and federally funded grants. And I've had federally funded grants that they pulled the plug on me because of poor enrollment. And I have a paper published in Jack on a trial that never finished recruitment, that the NIH withdrew funding, that we were able to cobble together and still get it published. But there's pluses and minuses for both.
That was perfect for Starling. I guess with the right boundaries and the right ethics and the right partners, the collaboration with industry, or really anyone, turns into innovation. With that, any final question or comment from anyone? All right. We are right on the hour.
Darling, I'll
Yeah.
have to ask you the one fun question. Alexander Valley versus Napa Valley for your cab, your favorite cab.
Uh, so you notice this is actually Mayacamas, which is at the top of Mount Veeder, and it would be on the western side of Napa Valley. If you go down the other side of Mount Veeder, you're in Sonoma. Who asked that question?
It's John.
Okay.
Amazing.